We have Dr. Jerry Worley, who is a full professor emeritus from the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. He is a retired educator of high school social studies and also a professor of education with an emphasis on methods. A Montana native, Worley juxtaposes Montana sports with an integrated layering of culture, geography, and, most importantly, the human variable. So we'll take a second. They get set up, and we'll hand it over to Jerry.
I have 34 years of teaching, and I think this is the most nervous I've ever been. So I'm just being honest with you. Been retired for a while. All right. Sons and daughters of farmers, the last years of Antelope High, and I guess we have some people in Antelope today. I'm not from Antelope, so thank you. Anybody from Antelope, please stand up. And you can correct me when I'm finished. So, thank you. Who am I? My name is Jerry Worley. I'm a retired professor from the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. I'm originally from Wolf Point. My dad worked for the highway department, and we moved from town to town up there on the High Line, building Highway 2. And I wasn't much of a student in high school. I learned to be a better student later in my life. I am fully retired now, and so I write sports stories, and sometimes they appear in the Bozeman Daily Chronicle and sometimes 406 Sports. But my stories aren't about winning and losing. They're more about the human variable, the human element, I guess, human experience, and existential in nature, questioning our existence, I guess. I want to start off with, from my hometown. This is a little bit of introduction before we get into Antelope here. This is Victor Bearskin. He's from Wolf Point. He played for 4 years for Bob Lowry. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit, and we can see he's in that old Scobie Cracker Box gym there. That's one of the bigger gyms back in the day. And Wolf Point was kind of like the fox in the hen house back in the day in Class B. One of the reasons was they had a much bigger school than the other schools around. But Victor was not only a 4-sport athlete, he was really a 5-sport. He was a calf roper. And he was on his way to be one of the best in the world. In fact, he roped for MSC or MSU as a freshman. Sadly, he died on the Bozeman Pass driving to MSC's annual rodeo, which invited the best in the nation. So I just finished writing a story that just came out in the, help me out here, the Gallatin History Journal. And I think it's going to show up in the Bozeman Chronicle. Quite a guy. And there's the rodeo back in the day, about 1954, I think. They had it in Belgrade. They got the best in the nation show. And he's buried at Chicken Hill Cemetery. That's named after Prairie Chicken Hill Band of the Wadopana Assiniboine, Nakona. There were about, depending on the scholar, 33 to 38 bands of Assiniboine that stretched from the Rocky Mountains all the way to North Dakota. And a few bands would end up on the Fort Peck Indian Reservation. So these are Victor's people. And there's his parents giving out the Victor Bearskin Memorial Calf Roping Award at MSC back in the day. They drove all the way from Wolf Point to give that to these winners. They were traditional Nakota people. A little bit of humor here. I'm not going to say who this school is, but it's Moore High School. And the boys decided they're going to take their picture with their helmets on. And they kind of struggled. I don't think they won a game that year. But lo and behold, Bob Petrino's going to show up the next year, and they'd win a few. And then I think he was there 1 year, then we'd go on to, I think, Harlowtown maybe, then Butte Central, and then Hall of Fame. So Moore does have quite a sports history. They're playing Win It here in the same year. We have the cheerleaders out here. I don't know if you can see it. They're about ready to receive a kickoff, but I think we have to have a talk with that superintendent about those goalposts there. I think we can do better than that. I'm really interested in the human variable. And if anybody wants to write with me, I'm open for. I really want to do a book on trivia, short trivia, Montana sports, but more about the human variable. Here's Havre Central High in 1966. That's the entire high school, Class B. and they're about ready to close in 2 or 3, 4 years. So they'd always start off with about kindergarten, about 80 kids, but end up graduating about 25. Major reason, not a lot of money for extracurricular, as in science projects, for example. We're going to talk about classification today. We're going to talk about Class C Antelope today. So the Montana High School Association is always reclassifying schools. Back in the day, there was only about 5 or 6 AA schools. 1942, they dropped from Big 6 to Big 5. So football teams are always looking for games. And so Montana teams played Salt Lake City teams, Everett, Washington, Grand Forks, if you can believe that. Here's a headline here. I wish I had a laser, but on the top where I have it in yellow, this is 1939. Great Falls bisons nipped by Everett seagulls. That's near Seattle. Seek revenge from Grand Forks. So they're taking the train for several days to play these other schools their size. Up until the 1970s, they were playing Boise teams, Great Falls High and CMR. Big fan of the Big 32. They went from Big 6 in basketball or Big 10. They went Big 32. They put all the Class A's and Double A's together from 1963 to 69. And people say it was the best basketball in Montana. A lot of fun. So the two smallest enrollments were Anaconda Central and Helena Central. And the largest schools, depended on the year, were Great Falls High or West, depending. So these are the Missoula Hellgate cheerleaders, 66, 67. You know, girls, this is before Title IX. They didn't have as much opportunity as the boys. All right, this is Willie Weeks, the great Willie Weeks. On the left was little brother David, and Willie would belong to a Wolf Point team that won the Big 32. And some of the little towns that won the Big 32 were Libby, and the last team was Laurel, and they went undefeated in 1969. They're at a powwow. Willie was also like Victor. He was a Assiniboine, Nakota. And early 70s, Title IX. This is Red Menahan from the Anaconda Copper A's. A lot of the girls' teams changed their names. This is at the 1973 state tournament in Miles City, all class. They would win it. Again, this is Kalispell newspaper, Flathead's Lovely Five, 1974. I don't think they would maybe use those words today. Cheerleading. I will say this for Flathead, they had a strong AAU programs for girls at this time. And also, Title IX, this is Ronan's Terry Campbell. She won the all-class long jump in 1974. So I'm very much interested in marginalized groups. Poplar Indians had great football teams back in the day. Believe it or not, they're a basketball school today. Even when they went to Class A, they almost won the Eastern A in their first year. But let's take a trip on our rocket ship to Antelope, shall we? Antelope Pronghorns, the unknown known. This is 1975. We have a little swag here. They didn't have much swag back then, but seat cushion, Antelope Pronghorns. They use 2 words for pronghorn. They traveled through time together. When Antelope entered the Cracker Box gymnasiums of the now defunct 1C, District 1C, they were like a dozen ducks in a row, following their coach. Unpretentious, they were a team traveling through time together. If only others knew of them, these pronghorns. They're really unknown by proximity, because there were so many other good little teams around them, we forget Antelope. And there I pulled this. There used to be 145 Class C teams. This was the Eastern Division football, 1945. We can see up in that northeast corner how there are many, many more towns back in the day up there. That's pretty good wheat country, Durham wheat. And so back in the day, they built a grain elevator about every 7 miles along a railroad spur for the farmers with their team of wagons, horse and wagons. And there were many more towns than this, but these were some of the high schools. There's Antelope, probably in the 70s, looking north. So that's that's Plentywood to the north, 7 miles away, or 8. And it might as well have been the moon. It was, yeah. Anyway, so when the school burned down, Antelope students went to Plentywood. And some of them make some jokes about it because they thought it was New York City, you know, might as well be New York City. Anyway, one of the families I talked to were the Eulans, Kendall, Keith, and Kathy, and then their cousin Stacy. That's the high school in the background. On the left, that's the school. On the right is the gym. They were, many of them shaped like a Quonset hut. This is Kendall Eulin in 1971. She's sitting on top of her clothesline. So that's how much snow they got that year. Some years there's no snow. Much drier in the east. And there they are today. Why am I showing you this? Some families up there really pushed education. It was important. And the Eulins all earned their degrees from Montana State University. Antelope area crops. In 75, it was durum, spring wheat, barley, and oats. Today, it's durum and pulse crops, i.e. peas, lentils, canola, chickpeas. So it's the, help me out here, it's the wheat to make pasta. So back in the day, half of it was resting. Today, every acre is seeded to something. Huge farms. Basically, no fallow today, 2/3 durum and rotation culture. This was District 1C in 1975. Small schools, and Westby had about 90 students. They pulled a lot of students from Fortuna Air Base in North Dakota. I would like to say something. They weren't that good in basketball, though, the kids that came from the air base, because they were always moving around, and Westby had quite a basketball culture. This was some of the old 1C schools. Opine's going to go to the 3C. They're the farthest west. They had a very good program. Medicine Lake goes to B. By the way, during this time period, Medicine Lake wrestling filled all 12 weight classes. Today, I think it has 15, maybe 15 students in the high school. And then here are some of the closed 1C schools. These are the first and second place 1C champions and runners-up from 1950 to 1974. Westby, Medicine Lake, and Outlook have owned that conference. We don't see Flaxville at all. Peerless, I don't know, once or twice, a little bit of Antelope. Believe it or not, in 1976, Flaxville is going to win the state title. Again in 79. They came out of nowhere. So in the 70s, this little conference of tiny schools had a stranglehold on state champions. There's right there. I threw in Opine, even though they moved to the 3C. They really had a 1C culture. Even Peerless that didn't win a state title, they were very dangerous. And here's a whole bunch more during this time period. Unbelievable, the power of the East. Plentywood's going to win the state A in 76. Poplar, first years in Class A, they win it 74, 75. They only had 250 kids, maybe 230, playing schools up to 1,000. And we haven't mentioned the girls. For example, the Outlook girls were state B champs in 75 and 76. B back then were C and B together. For a few years, it was Class A only. That was A and double A for a few years. All right, and the fans behaved like lemmings. They came, and so I used AI here, and I didn't get a lemming. I got a kitty cat and a computer, but they came to the games, win or lose. There's the last annual of Antelope High, 1979. That's what the school looked like. We're talking about 1975. That's the Pronghorn. There's a graduating class. That's a big class of 13. All 6 seniors played basketball, and they're all pretty good. 13 in that class. I love the picture. That's probably all the trees in Antelope right there, so probably fun. The Outlook Gym, for example, was open all year. They were basketball savvy in this part of the country. Antelope spun defenses around with constant motion. Then they countered with backdoors. It was perfect basketball. Had a very good coach in Terry Bakken. Movement without the ball. Here are their players. They played about 8, and that's pretty good if you can find 8 good ball players in a high school of 37. Nobody was glued to the floor. They were athletes. track, quote unquote, was the street. So they had basketball and track. I can remember falling, practicing the hurdles and hitting rocks on my knees. Kendall Hewlin. This is a quote, I think, from a Westby athlete about track up there. Antelope and Outlook never had tracks. It was on gravel, for God's sake. Marble-sized gravel and tennis shoes, for God's sake. We had one barbell with weights, no weight room, no Nautilus. Most of us were strong because we hayed through bales all summer long. Ken Paulson was a farm kid, would run behind his dad's seating, follow him around the field to get in shape. These guys were state champs. Paul McCabe used to run from his farm into Medicine Lake every morning. They did it without facilities, just like basketball. Hoops were put up in backyards. The best player for Antelope was Harvey Lee. He was about 6'1" or 6'2". This is a couple years after he graduated. He's at a track meet here. I think Little Brother's getting an award. Harvey was state champs in the high hurdles in 1975. I love his buddy there with the old Rock and R cap. That's when Rock and R was the Rock and R in the 70s and 60s. And I have a fuzzy report here from the newspaper. We see Harvey won the state championship, beat Tom Powell from Lewistown St. Leo's Catholic School. Dale Gwem from Twin Bridges was quite an athlete. And we see Colstrip was Class C. Later, they would be Class A. And then we have the ultimate Irish name, and Pat Gallagher from Brady. So they were good track athletes, nobody glued to the floor. Keith Hewlin, Antelope starter since his freshman year. He was district 1C mile and half-mile champ in 1974. Vic Johannesson had those great 70s sideburns there. District pole vault and sprint champion. Dennis Gunther was a triple jump champion. Jim Hovitt, he was a lanky 6'3", but he qualified for state track in 3 disparate events: high jump, shot put, and the relays. He could throw the shot over 45 feet. And then we have Dan Danielson, a 6-foot junior. He came off the bench. They said he was probably one of the better 6 men probably in the state. Double champion in both relays for the Antelope Pronghorns district. Their nemesis was Westby, 35 miles away. Westby sits right on that North Dakota line. And they're going to have a Hall of Fame coach, a young coach by the name of Dick Norden. He lives in Boulder today. Probably some of you know him. He's still alive, yeah. Just talk to him. And here's some of their players. Greg Smithson. They had a nice team. Kevin Burbick. Monty Solberg was also state champ in the javelin. By the way, Westby is Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish country, and German, just like Antelope. David Shields. But the player was Alan Nielsen. And the more I find out about Alan, he's been one of the nicest guys around. Sadly, he would die in an accident, I want to say in the late 70s. Real sad story. Great ball player. They say one of the best ever from up there. So Westby goes 20-0. They go into the district tournament. They're 20-0. Lo and behold, Peerless knocks them off. Bottom feeders, Peerless. But luckily, they came back and get third in the district, and they were lucky because that year, 3 from that district went on to the divisional, which was sort of a minefield of talent. So Antelope's going to end up state champion, and district champion. By this time, they've only lost 4 games, all 4 to Westby. So this is actually, one of the Antelope fans filled this out. This is the divisional bracket. So Antelope's going to wipe out Lambert. Westby's going to destroy Opheim. There's Keith Hewlin versus Lambert. Alan Nielsen versus Opheim. By the way, Opheim was almost Class B back then. To think about bumping them up, they had 28 kids. Airbase is closed, but they still had the radar station up there. I think they only have 4 or 5 kids today. But Nielsen's going to score 49 points against Antelope in the semis. Has a great game. By the way, it's spelled S-E-N. Yeah, 49 points, perfect from the free throw line, 17 rebounds, 5 block shots. They beat Antelope by 12. Antelope's 5th loss. Now Antelope has to go through the back door to get to state. And they do it. They win 3 games, and they're lucky that Fraser gets beat. And they haven't played Fraser yet, so they're going to end up beating the Fraser Bear Cubs, an Assiniboine community from the Fort Peck Indian Reservation, by the way, and make it to state. So that divisional was in Sydney. And here was the state senator, Rod Smith from Medicine Lake. Medicine Lake won the state B title during the C divisional. So he's going to put down Medicine Lake B champs in Helena there at the Capitol. But he's going to add a few more teams to that from his little district. Poplar Standard predicts, will the Honkers, first Medicine Lake Honkers, by the way, will they be the first of northeastern Montana's title sweep? So they predicted it. And by the way, Medicine Lake beat Miles City Sacred Heart, another Catholic school that has closed its doors for the B championship. These are the teams in the Class C state tournament here in Helena. Helena had the state C for many, many years. A lot of you know more than I do about this. They're all very large schools, very good. Absaroka with 120 students. Antelope only had 37. Box Elder had a nice team, 113. Hysham, Sugar Beet Country, excellent team. Manhattan Christian with quite a tradition had an excellent team, 106 students. St. Leo's of Lewistown, which is now closed, had 72 students. Victor out of the West had 113 and Westby 90. Again, that's a little bit skewed because a lot of those Air Base kids really didn't have a basketball background. Some of the tournament programs from an Antelope fan. Thursday opening rounds, Westby knocked off Victor. Westby paralyzed. Nielsen gets 24 points. Thursday first round, Christian Antelope wins state Thrillers. Here we have Antelope upset Hysham by 10. There was a fight in the stands, by the way, and a Hysham fan was sitting in the Antelope section, and if you want to find out more about that, I can tell you later, but the police had to come and escort some people, and there were broken glasses and all kinds of stuff. But anyway, so the big upset for the Pronghorns, Friday night, Westby and Antelope are in the semifinals. Alan Nielsen turned in one of the most spectacular performances in the history of the Class C basketball in leading Westby to victory over St. Leo's. That's from the Independent Record. And there we see the box score. It looks like Alan got 47 points. Alan Nielsen versus Lewistown St. Leo's. And then Antelope, unranked. They hadn't been ranked all year. They were dissed all year. Shocked, number 1 rated Manhattan Christian, the second semifinal contest. The most shocking upset of the tournament. And there we have the box score. They won by 3. And now it's Antelope versus Westby for the 6th time. I need some help with this. You know, Manhattan Christian has a strong Dutch community. So Vern Droge, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, Jim Hovitt. Notice how packed that Carroll College gym was. It was always like that during tournament time. I heard they had to turn away hundreds of fans every year. Dennis Gunther versus Manhattan Christian. This is the Westby Antelope game. I have Antelope in their colors as Keith Ewan and Dennis Gunther, Jim Hove, and Monty Solberg. Antelope had the lead a few minutes after halftime. They had the lead by 3. And then Westby took over. There we see some of the fight there. This is a very famous picture of Alan Nielsen shooting over the Antelope defense. Alan there and Monty Solberg. There's the Antelope players, Keith Ewan, Dennis Gunther, Vic is falling down, and Harvey Lee. That's their best player on the right. Antelope finished 23-6, all 6 losses to Westby. Westby beats Antelope again, these are the headlines, I think maybe the Gazette, to win the Class C championship. There's the box score. Again, Antelope was ahead by 3 in the third quarter, but Westby's going to pull away. And David Shields was actually one of the heroes of that game. In memory, David. And then Bob Spokley from Antelope. People were, where's Antelope? Where's Antelope? So he took a semi, I don't know, and he parked it in the Capitol. I think it was near the Capitol. And here's where they are. So he's got Westby, Antelope, Poplar, and Medicine Lake. The power's in the east. He left that park there, I guess, for a few days. Correct me if I'm wrong. Here's some of the leading scores of that tournament. Come see me later to check out these stats. We can look at some of these. Terry Balkin from Antelope was voted top coach in the tourney, even though they took second. Here's the Sheridan County News or the Plentywood Herald. I'm not sure which. So proud of their Sheridan County teams, plus Poplar just to the south on the Fort Peck Reservation. All state champions or runners up. Poplar won 2 in a row. And the Kern brothers were MVPs in 74 and 75. And in 75, the same year, the Class A state was in the Butte Civic Center. And the most exciting game were the Browning Indians versus the Poplar Indians in the state semis. Pep bands going, both teams have their headdresses on, when they warm up. And all of those headdresses were traditional. Blackfeet and or Sioux, Lakota, Nakota, Dakota. And Tom Gramboys told me that. He was on this team. They were all traditional headdresses. Big Ed is proud of the county teams. His son Rod was on that Medicine Lake team, who would play for the Bobcats, by the way. Big Ed's from basketball country. On the same night, the University of Montana almost beats UCLA in the Sweet 16, and they lost in overtime. It might have been double overtime. Was it 3? Yeah, and UCLA is going to go on to win our national title. Antelope styling and profiling in their 1970s garb. I love it. At their banquet, celebrating their second place. There they are. Love it. And went back and interviewed a lot of them. They took me around to all their farms. And this Harvey Lee lived right next to the school. Kenny Nielsen was on the class of 77. He was on a very good team. And Keith Euland's retired. Today, they took me everywhere, to every little town up there. It was wonderful. They took me to Outlook. What's the, you never go through Outlook. You have to go to Outlook. One of those things. Outlook's the cleanest Class C town I've ever seen in Montana. I mean, it is Spartan, in my opinion. There's the old Blue Jay gym. It was always unlocked. This was the 77 team. They won divisional. Here's their best player, Craig Gunther. They're ready to go to state. Guess what? He contracts chicken pox. And they lose in 2. Might have been the best team ever for Antelope. Sadly, he's going to transfer to Plentywood the next year, and Plentywood wins state. And then Antelope School burns down. Yeah, a little hard luck there. During this time period, Title IX's coming out. And I talked to some of the Antelope girls. Many didn't want to play when they could because they didn't know how to play, unlike Outlook, for example. So they waited a year or 2. This was their first girls' team. There's their first girls' game versus Culbertson. They were in a Class B, that B and C together. There are some of their first teams there. Notice we see a lot of sophomores and freshmen because they got a chance to practice in junior high. And Kathy Euland, class of 77, she would later play for the Bob Kittens. That basically was MSU's JV back in the day. And there's her letter jacket, class of 77. Some of her swag there. Music was very big in Antelope. There we go. Also a cheerleader. They did everything. There's little sister Kendall, last class, 79. There's her letter jacket. There we go, cheerleader. And by the way, music was the most important thing to her. And then in October 78, this school's destroyed by fire. Everything burned in 78. Uniforms, musical instruments, grades, and some weren't going to Plentywood to save their souls. So, Plentywood's a good, I got friends in Plentywood. I mean, but you know how that rivalry is. So when it burned, by the way, the next year, Antelope had the students had a choice of going to Medicine Lake, Plentywood, or Westby to finish. Everything burned. And it was grades 5 through 12. Band stopped because instruments burned. Then they would play. They finished in Plentywood was gracious enough to give them 2 rooms, I think. So they always played on the road. They had outstanding athletes coming up. According to the Antelope students, they would be last in the lunch line, and supposedly they would run out of food in Plentywood. I don't know if that's true, but it could be. Could be. There's the school before, there's after. Started in the basement, I think the science room maybe. Some of the students, within days they're in Plentywood High though, they're going to school. Many Montana high schools have burned down. Plentywood hosts students from Antelope. And one said they looked at us like we were third world. Now, who are these country kids, you know? And they're, 6, 7, 8 miles away. Here's some Kendall Euland's quotes. They had an excellent school board and treasurer, dedicated staff, strong superintendent in John McNeil. He turned us around. He came with direction. And then the school burned down. Antelope had strong teachers, well-schooled. We saw the difference with our high schools when we went to college compared to the other kids. Jim and Carol Baldwin, Jim taught there. We would have stayed longer, but the school burned down. Jim is still a superintendent today, by the way, of many different high schools. How are we doing on time? We're done. Okay. I was going to give some advertising here. They did have disco up in Plentywood if you wanted. So that was at the end of the annual there. So anyway. I do have some more stuff if anybody wants to look at it. I would like to end with one thing here. Thank you. I, Jody Sunstead, being of sound mind and body, will my ability to argue with the teachers to Perry Kay, my penmanship to Julie Brentonson, my locker to any of the freshman boys who make it to the 10th grade, and to all of the kids in school, my ability to graduate from good old AHS. I hope they all have a chance to, like myself. They didn't know if they were going to keep the school going or not, rebuild or not, during the spring of '79. So, sorry I ran out of time. Thank you.